Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leak. I'm John as always, and we've made it. We're here. We are at the final Kaladesh set review. We're going to cover the second half of the artifacts and the handful of lands that are in the set that don't really garner too much discussion anyways. But you know the disclaimers, this is a limited set review. If these grades rub you the wrong way because your favorite card is going to be awesome in Legacy, doesn't matter. Doesn't apply to this review. Limited only. You know the rest. Go back and check out white, blue, black, red, green, and the first half of artifacts if you haven't already. But we're going to jump on in to the first card. Up first, we have Filigree Familiar. Filigree Familiar is 3 generic mana for an artifact creature, Fox at uncommon. It's a 2/2. It's adorable. And when Filigree Familiar enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life. When Filigree Familiar dies, draw a card. This just seems like fine to good filler. It's a 2/2 for 3 that gives you 2 life on the way in and a card on the way out. And it's an artifact for all the Artifact Matters cards. I'm sold. It's totally solid filler. I doubt I will ever cut it, but of course I'm never going to take it higher than kind of mid-pack. So solid C+. Puzzle Knot is 2 generic mana for an artifact at common. When Fireforger's Puzzle Knot enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Pay 2 and a red, sacrifice it, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Does the same thing again. No. This card just seems bad. Seems so bad. 2 mana for 1 damage. And then later in the game, 3 mana for 1 damage. Or if I want to build my own shock, I can pay 5 mana for the honor of casting shock. This just seems terrible. It just seems absolute garbage. There's no reason for you to play this card. There are better burn spells, there are better artifacts, there are better cards. This card is just bad. D-. Don't play it. It is terrible. Fleetwheel Cruiser is up next. It's 4 generic mana for an artifact vehicle at rare. It's a 5/3. It has trample. It has haste. When Fleetwheel Cruiser enters the battlefield, it becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. It crews itself the first time, and then you have to crew it with only 2. So we've got a 5/3 trample with haste for 4. That's pretty good. And you'll be able to get in for some, if not all of the damage a lot of the time where your opponent didn't leave back a blocker and you just smack them for a quarter of their starting life total. But once the surprise is worn off, this becomes less good. The trample keeps it very playable though. That 3 toughness is harsh, so you know you're not just going to be smashing this in. You're going to be a little bit careful with it, but it still seems very, very solid, and I'm going to go with a B- on it. I don't think I'd first pick it. Well, no, I know I wouldn't first pick it against removal and things like that, but in a weaker-ish pack, it seems like a first pickable card to me, so B-. Up next, we have Foundry Inspector. Foundry Inspector is 3 generic mana for an artifact creature construct at uncommon. It's a 3/2. Artifact spells you cast cost 1 generic mana less to cast. So just like Chief of the Foundry, this guy's really deck dependent, but with a bit of care, it can just be huge. Being uncommon, I can see it being a bit hard to get both this and the Chief, but boy, if you do, you could really attempt, it probably wouldn't be the best idea, but you could attempt just a mono artifact deck. Still, I think this sits solidly at a B- level, dropping it if you have too few artifacts, but if you can get this discount on like 4 or 5 artifacts, and especially more, this thing is just going to be fantastic. I'm at a B- on it. I think I'll pick it pretty high to start, high mid-pack, never a first pick, but B- to start on Foundry Inspector. Up next is Girapur Orrery. Girapur Orrery is 4 generic mana for an artifact at rare. Each player may play an additional land on each of his or her turns. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, that player draws 3 cards. They get a free Ancestral Recall. 4 mana for symmetrical effects like this, I'm out. I don't like symmetrical effects like this, especially when my opponent gets to take advantage of them first. Obviously, my opponent has to be out of cards as well, but this is limited. That happens more often than not. Yeah, I think I'll take a hard pass on this. I'll leave it to the Commander group hug sort of players, and I'm on a D- on it. I'm going to leave it till the end of the pack. Up next is the blue Puzzle Knot, Glassblower's Puzzle Knot. Glassblower's Puzzle Knot is 2 generic mana for an artifact at common. When Glassblower's Puzzle Knot enters the battlefield, scry 2, then you get 2 energy. Pay 2 and a blue, sacrifice it, and then scry 2 and you get 2 energy again. You get to do it all again, as always with the Puzzle Knots. Yeah, I'm really unsure about these Puzzle Knots. I've said that, and I'm going to continue to say that. They're common, so they can't be too amazing, just from a game designer perspective. If these were in fact good, I think they'd be uncommon. Scrying 2, getting 2 energy for 2 mana is alright, but that's really doing nothing. Getting another 2 energy and Scry 2 a bit later is fine as well, but again, you're doing nothing. Too much of an engine piece and not a good enough one for limited, I think. So I'm on a D on this puzzle knot as well. I'm not going to touch it. Up next is Inventor's Goggles. Inventor's Goggles are 1 generic mana for an artifact equipment at common. Equipped creature gets +1/+2, the equip cost is 2, and whenever an artificer enters the battlefield under your control, you may attach Inventor's Goggles to it. These are interesting. I expect a lot of people to compare these to True Faith Sensor and say, hey, it basically costs the same, so it must be great too. But True Faith Sensor, I think, was huge because of the vigilance. Wolfkin Bond was actually terrible because it didn't have vigilance compared to Knightly Valor, which was the exact same card with vigilance. So, ignoring the Artificer clause, I think this is really kind of mediocre. It's similar to, I think, Cultist Staff. It was begrudgingly playable if you were creature heavy and still had a slot to fill. You could play Cultist Staff, and I think the same thing is going to be here. I think it's going to be slightly weaker than Cultist Staff, being +1/+2 as opposed to +2/+2. But yeah, if you do have a bunch of Artificers, it gets slightly better, but I don't even think it's enough to raise the grade, even if you are in like mono Artificers. There's a lot of Artificers out there, and there's a lot of incidental ones that you'll be playing anyways, but I just don't think it's that much of a bonus to boost it or anything that you should really seek out. So I'm on a C- on Inventor's Goggles. I think it's begrudgingly playable if you have a lot of creatures and if you still have a spot to fill. If you don't, pass it by, and don't feel bad about passing it by. But yeah, C- for Inventor's Goggles. Up next is Iron League Steed. Iron League Steed is 4 generic mana for an artifact creature constructed at uncommon. To 2/2, it has haste, and it has Fabricate 1. This seems fine. This seems totally fine. It's a 4 mana, 3/3 with haste, if you do put the counter on it. If you make a servo, cool, but I don't think that's going to be correct in a lot of board states. I think you're just going to want to smash in for 3 with haste. Still, it's always includable. It's not exciting or anything to stretch for, just a solid C+. Up next is Key to the City. Key to the City is 2 generic mana for an artifact at rare. Tap, discard a card. Up to 1 target creature can't be blocked this turn. Whenever Key to the City becomes untapped, you may pay 2 generic mana. If you do, draw a card. So, Rogue's Passage definitely did a little bit of work in Limited. That was a land that you could pay 4 and tap it to make a creature unblockable. Here, this technically costs way less because you're discarding a card. Of course, depending on what you're discarding. If it's a land, it's way less of a cost. If you have, 1 card in hand and it's really good, it's more of a cost, obviously. Honestly, I think this could be surprisingly good compared to what some people would initially think about when they see this, but it's not in a bomby way. It's just in a utility way, of course, so it's going to cap the grade for sure. I'm not sure where I would pick it. I'd be inclined to think that it's high mid-pack. High mid-pack, not first pickable, I don't think, and not kind of first few picks. I'm definitely going to try it out to start, though. I could see it drop a little bit from my initial evaluation, but I'm pretty happy to start with a B- on this. I think it could just do a lot of work. And the fact that if you have the mana, you can just replace that card you discarded seems really good. Up next is Metal Spinner's Puzzle Knot. Metal Spinner's Puzzle Knot is 2 generic mana for an artifact at common. When Metal Spinner's Puzzle Knot enters the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Pay 2 and a black, sacrifice it, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Just like all the puzzle knots, I don't really care about this one. It just doesn't seem that great to me. Again, as with all of them, even if you really need to up your artifact count, I don't really think they're playable. They're just so weak for what you're costing, they seem awful. If you're desperate, truly desperate for artifacts, I guess, but that says to me that your draft went really wrong or your pool is really bad. So D- on Metal Spinner's Puzzle Knot. I'm not in on it either. Up next is Metalwork Colossus. Metalwork Colossus is 11 generic mana for an artifact creature construct at rare. It's a 10/10. Metalwork Colossus costs X less to cast, where X is the total converted mana cost of non-creature artifacts you control. Sacrifice 2 artifacts, return Metalwork Colossus from your graveyard to your hand. This is surprisingly okay to me at first. When I first saw it, I said, no, it's just bad. It's like a C- or even lower. It's kind of the Desolation twins of the set. The very expensive, flashy card that doesn't quite get there in most games. But coming around on it, I think it is actually okay. Obviously, you're not going to hit Magical Christmas Land and cast this on turn 5 for 1 mana, which is probably the best you could do. But, even if you can discount this by, not even 50%, even 6 mana, I think, would be fine for a 10/10. The real downside of this, of course, is that it doesn't have anything. It doesn't have trample. It doesn't have anything to help it get through. It is a 10/10, so you can just turn it sideways and it will kill things left and right, and it probably won't even be able to trade in combat, barring some death touch. So you will eventually get there, but it is slow. It's not like this is a big flyer or a big trampler or anything like that. So that's going to cap the grade for me. It's going to cap it at a B-. I don't think I would ever first pick it, and I don't know. I think my initial instinct was wrong. I don't think this is bad, but I could see it even dropping from a B-. But I'm going to start it at a B- because I think you can reliably get this discounted enough that it's fine for a virtually vanilla 10/10. So B- to start on Metalwork Colossus. Up next is Multiform Wonder. Multiform Wonder is 5 generic mana for an artifact creature construct at rare. It's a 3/3. When Multiform Wonder enters the battlefield, you get 3 energy. Pay 1 energy, Multiform Wonder gains your choice of Flying, Vigilance, or Lifelink until end of turn. Pay 1 energy, Multiform Wonder gets +2/-2 or -2/+2 until end of turn. 5 mana seems basically perfect for this. I don't think you could get any lower without this just being busted. If you have decent enough energy production, this could end games over a few turns, and even just the 3 energy it produces can be enough to end the games. For 2 energy, you can get a 5/1 flyer, which sounds like a beating to me. The pure versatility of this being able to be a blocker, an attacker, a lifelink, or a flyer, whatever you feel like, is probably just way too much to pass up. I'm inclined to think that this is first pickable. Probably not over removal. I think this is better than, or I think removal is just better than this. Staying completely open color-wise is quite nice as well. I'm going to start this as a B+. I think it's really, really, really good. Yeah, I'll be first picking this pretty regularly unless I'm up against just premium unconditional removal. So B+ for Multiform Wonder. Up next is Arnhem Cobra. Arnhem Cobra is 2 generic mana for an artifact creature, Snake, at common. It's a 2/1. You can pay green to give Arnhem Cobra Death Touch until end of turn. Seems fine, obviously, if you're in green. If you're not, it's just a Goblin Piker, a 2/1 for 2, which is not generally worth playable unless you're desperate. But assuming you're in green, it's a solid death toucher that can just hold the ground and attack and trade with most things. So solid C+ if you're in green, obviously much lower if you're not. Oval Chase Dragster is up next. Oval Chase Dragster is 4 generic mana for an artifact vehicle at uncommon. It's a 6/1. It's got trample, it's got haste, crew 1. Like Fleetwheel Cruiser, I think the haste is what really saves this card and catapults it from its otherwise mediocre rating, nowhere near as high as Fleetwheel Cruiser, of course, but this can kind of act like a ball lightning because of the haste and the trample. The crew 1 is such a low cost to pay. A lowly servo can turn this thing on. Now this thing, of course, dies left, right, and center, but the odds are you're still going to get through some damage while killing a creature, and so it is going to function totally fine. I'm at sort of a C on this. I think there will be cases where you don't play this, and I think there's definitely other vehicles that you would play instead of this one, so I'm not going to go much higher than a C, but I will fault nobody for playing this, and I will play it a good amount of the time. So C for Oval Chase Dragster. Attacks very well, tramples over, otherwise a little bit fragile. Up next is Panharmonicon. Panharmonicon is 4 generic mana for an artifact at rare. If an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So, any artifact, any creature entering the battlefield anywhere, on any side, that causes one of your permanents to trigger, it does it again. If you have a question, call the judge, please. Anyways, this card's bad. This card is bad. I don't care what you saw Blake do at the pre-release. That was sealed. That was for entertainment value. That was everybody's first time even seeing most of the cards. don't expect that to happen reliably. This is going to be one of those cards that's just going to always sound amazing, and who knows, maybe could do something in Constructed. Obviously, we'll do things in Commander and casual formats, but I just don't think it's going to get there in Limited. Pairing it with Gold Mulldrifter, Cloud Blazer would be awesome. Fabricate Energy, sure, that would be cool, but it's just not going to work out for you enough of the time, and a lot of the time it's just going to be a 4-mana do nothing. If you can build it, cool. Do it and tell that story for the rest of your life, but don't expect it. Don't play this card if you can avoid it, and if you're in a competitive situation, just pass this card hard. I'm at a D- on this, I think. I don't want to go for F because, yes, it's going to work here or there, but yeah, D- for Panharmonicon. Perpetual Timepiece is up next. Perpetual Timepiece is 2 generic mana for an artifact at uncommon. Tap it, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. Pay 2, exile Perpetual Timepiece, shuffle any number of target cards from your graveyard into your library. Super pass. Just a super pass. It's Elixir of Immortality minus the life gain plus a self-mill ability. Elixir of Immortality, you could tap it and sack it to get 5 life and shuffle your library. Not really what I'm looking for in this limited format. It seems just unplayable. There's no reason to play this ever. Solid F. Just don't touch it. It's bad card. Up next is Prakata Pillarbug. Prakata Pillarbug is 3 generic mana for an artifact creature insect at common. It's a 2/3, and you can pay black to give it lifelink until end of turn, which, as long as this set is being drafted, I'm going to assume is Death Touch, because it's really strange for it to get lifelink. Anyways, it's 2/3 for 3, which is really not a card you're going to touch if you're not in black. If you're in black, it's fine, but probably cuttable way more often than not. It's lowish on the stats. The lifelink is fine, but not super worth it on an otherwise vanilla creature. So if you're in black, I think you cut it regularly, so C-. If you're not in black, I don't think you even think about playing this card ever, so C- if you're in black, lower if you're not. Up next is Prophetic Prism. Prophetic Prism is 2 generic mana for an artifact at common. When Prophetic Prism enters the battlefield, draw a card. Pay 1, tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. I've played with Prophetic Prism. I think it was in Gate Crash, I want to say, and it was somewhere else as well. It's in Cube sometimes. I think it's in my Cube even. It's a fine card. It doesn't ramp you. Some people misread it sometimes. It does not ramp you. It just filters you. It really helps to splash, and the draw card to replace itself is great. Only costing 2 mana is a relatively low impact cost. It's a card that I play if I need to splash, and if you don't, you don't. So it's kind of a solid C. Play it if you need to, and there's no problem playing it, and there's no problem cutting it either. So solid C, late pack. If it's there, pick it up. Up next is Renegade Freighter. Renegade Freighter is 3 generic mana for an artifact vehicle at common. It's a 4/3. Whenever Renegade Freighter attacks, it gets +1/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. Crew 2. This seems like a really solid vehicle. It's only 3 mana. It's a 4/3 that attacks like a 5/4, and it has a low crew cost of 2. I'm pretty sure this is one of the common vehicles that I'm totally fine basically always playing. Seems like a very solid C+. Obviously, do not load up on them, but this one I think is going to be really solid. If you can do a 2-drop into this, I think you are just going to crush games. And yeah, I'm going to keep an eye on this one because I think it could be just fantastic. In fact, so fantastic that I think I'm actually going to upgrade it to a B-. Let's go B- on Renegade Freighter. Up next is Scrap Heap Scrounger. Scrap Heap Scrounger is 2 generic mana for an artifact creature construct at rare. It's a 3/2. Scrap Heap Scrounger can't block. Pay 1 and a black, exile another creature card from your graveyard. Return Scrap Heap Scrounger from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this is very similar to a card called Despoiler of Souls, which was in Origins, I believe. It was 2 black. It was a 3/1 that couldn't block, and you could pay 2 black to return or to exile 2 creatures out of the battlefield. So this honestly just seems better in every single way, and that's still not going to be enough. Despoiler of Souls was bad. It was just a card that never really got there, and I don't expect Scrap Heap Scrounger to really get there too much either. The 2 toughness is going to help out quite a bit, and I think it's going to save it from being a C- up to like a C, maybe a C+, but I think it's just going to end up not being good enough. If you are in an incredible aggressive deck, then this could do some good work, but ultimately I think it's going to feel like just a slightly better Despoiler of Souls, and so I'm going to keep it at a C. Up next is SelfAssembler. SelfAssembler is 5 generic mana for an artifact creature assembly worker at common. It's a 4/4. When SelfAssembler enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an assembly worker creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. The only assembly worker creature in the entire set is SelfAssembler itself, so that's all it's going to be finding. So 5 mana for a 4/4 that goes and gets other 5 mana 4/4s is fine, not terribly exciting if you don't have another one, and if you have one other one it gets a little bit better. If you have 2 more, it's fine, although you're starting to fill up your 5-drop slot, and I don't think you really want many more than that. You get to guarantee yourself another 4/4 next turn, which is fine. You're really establishing your board. I don't know, I think this is like a C- for the first one, just because it's kind of in that big creature that doesn't do much, but it's not even that big of a creature. If you have the second one anyways, if you have 2, it gets a little bit better, like a C, maybe a C+. The third one is where I start to get a little bit iffy. I don't know if I want to fill my 5-drop slot up with just vanilla creatures that much, but still could be fine. So I'm going to go C on this if you start to go off with it, but if you just have one, you can be pretty safe cutting it unless you really need a creature. So C- to C, maybe a C+, but we'll see how it shapes out. Let's go with the middle of the road C. Up next is Skye Skiff. Skye Skiff is 2 generic mana for an artifact vehicle at common. It's a 2/3, it has flying, and the crew cost is just 1. This seems pretty decent, especially if you have some 2-drops or even 1-drops in your deck, or some servos or something like that, and you can turn this on because then it's a 2/3 flyer for 2, which is totally fine. Outside of being a wide creature deck, I think this falls in value a fair bit. If you don't have, a great amount of creatures, if you're in kind of the 13-14 range, you might not want to play this, or really any vehicle for that matter. But as long as you're an average like 15 or more creature deck, I think this is going to be pretty solid. I'm going to start this at a C+. I think it'll do a good amount of work. Crew 1 is just fantastic, and having flying is going to get through for some damage. So C+, Skye Skiff. Up next is Skye Sovereign Console Flagship. 5 generic mana for a legendary artifact vehicle at Mythic. It's a 6/5, it's a flyer. Whenever Skye Sovereign Console Flagship enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker on opponent controls. Crew 3. Getting a lightning bolt when this comes in is really nice, as it will hopefully buy you some space to start crewing and attacking in with this. Crewing 3 probably is not going to be that big of a deal at all, and smashing in with a 6/5 flyer that also shoots down an X3 creature is going to be a massive problem for your opponent. I'm pretty certain you first pick this, and I assume it's very bomby when it's on. Of course, the real question is, can you turn it on regularly enough? Just like every vehicle, if you are slightly low in creatures, be careful, but if you are at all average in your creature count, this is just going to be amazing. This will end games. I'm going to put this in the solid A range. It is a snap first pick. Boy, this is just a fantastic vehicle, so solid A. Up next is another rare vehicle, Smugglers Copter. Smugglers Copter is 2 generic mana for an artifact vehicle at rare. It's a 3/3 flying. Whenever Smugglers Copter attacks or blocks, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. And crew of my favorite number, 1. If Skye Skiff was good, this is just strictly amazingly better. It's also 2 mana, it's a 3/3, it's also crew 1, and you get to loot anytime you attack or block, which this thing does fairly well. This just seems like it could be an absolute beating. There's no way you do not snap first pick this card and you play it 100% of the time. It's not quite a bomb, but it's going to finish games over several turns. It's just so good. I'm going to go with an A- on it just because it is just a 3/3 flyer, but that's the floor for this card. That's the worst rating this card could get. A- seems just super solid. Snare Topetre is up next. Snare Topetre is 4 generic mana for an artifact creature, Thopter at uncommon. It's a 3/2, it has flying, and it has haste. This just seems like a pretty solid little dude. The toughness is slightly low, but if your opponent doesn't have a flyer, you're just going to go to town right away with that haste. I'll pick these relatively high mid-pack, and I'm pretty sure I'll play it probably just 100% of the time. Just seems really, really solid. B-, a great little Thopter dude. Up next is Torch Gauntlet. Torch Gauntlet is 2 generic mana for an artifact equipment at common. Equipped creature gets +2/+0, and the equip cost is just 2, but that's probably still not quite enough for this to actually be good. That is 4 mana for +2/+0 for the first time at least, at which point I'm just out. You know, it's an artifact, but no, just like the Puzzle Knots, there's way better ways for you to have artifacts in play. Don't play this just for that fact. This is just a card that I'm never going to touch, as with many, many, many pieces of equipment. So, pure F. I'm never touching this. I recommend you don't touch it either. Next up is Weldfast Monitor. Weldfast Monitor is 3 generic mana for an artifact creature lizard at common. It's a 3/2. Pay a red. Weldfast Monitor gains Menace until end of turn. Having to pay for the Menace every turn hurts this a little bit, especially since it's not even going to be on until turn 4 at the absolute earliest, and before long, your opponent will just have 2 creatures that can block and kill this. It's still a solid C, I think, in every deck, being a 3 mana 3/2, but in the red deck I don't think this gets that much higher. Not enough to push it up to C+ in the red deck, so I think this is just a C across the board, basically regardless of deck. Up next is Whirler Maker. Whirler Maker is 3 generic mana for an artifact at uncommon. Pay 4 generic mana, tap, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So for 7 mana, you get a 1/1. That's really bad. That's really, really, really bad. For 11 mana, you get 2 1/1s. That's still pretty bad. I don't think you play this card unless you have the artifact Thopter Lords, in which case you're making 2/2 flyers every turn. 4 mana to make 2/2s is fine, and maybe you can have the artifact the Thopter Lord plus the Artifact Lord, in which case you're making 3/3s, and then this gets really good. Take this only if you pack 1, pick 1 to Thopter Lord, and or already have a Chief of the Foundry. Otherwise, I think this should be cut in probably all but the most controlling of decks, and even in those, I think it should probably be cut. I'm going to go with a D+ on it. Our final Puzzle Knot is here, Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot. Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot is 2 generic mana for an artifact at common. When Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life and you get 3 energy. Pay 2 and a green and sacrifice it to do it all again. Like all the Puzzle Knots, I just don't think this is worth it. Spending a card and a turn, or maybe half a turn if it's later in the game, I guess, to get 3 life and 3 energy, I just feel like there's way better ways of doing that, such as having a creature with a body attached to it. Getting that effect again for 3 mana? No. I don't like these Puzzle Knots. I just think they're terrible. I don't think you should be playing this. I'm going to go with C- on it. Maybe here or there you could get really desperate for artifacts or for energy and play it, but just C-. I'm out on Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot. Our final artifact of this artifact set is Workshop Assistant. Workshop Assistant is a 3 generic mana artifact creature construct at common. It's a 1/2, and when Workshop Assistant dies, return another target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. A 1/2 for 3. It gets back another artifact, if I have one in the graveyard, to my hand. Just no thanks. 3 mana 1/2s are not something I'm into unless they have an incredible effect, and this one has an effect which I think most people consider fine to slightly mediocre, and I personally consider rather mediocre. I'm out on this. I'm out on this hard. D-. I don't think you should ever touch this guy. Alright, so that wraps it up for artifacts. We just have some lands to cover. The first land we have is Aether Hub. Aether Hub is a land at uncommon. When Aether Hub enters the battlefield, you get 1 energy. Tap, add colorless to your mana pool, or tap, pay an energy to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. I'm not terribly a fan of this. I don't think fixing is going to be at a premium in this set. It doesn't exist too much, and I don't think 3-color decks are going to be something you should ever do. If you are splashing, you probably can pick this up, and if you aren't splashing, I don't think you should really ever touch this. Getting a reusable Crumbling Vestige isn't something that I'm going to go out of my way to pick up anyways. I think if you want the fixing, you should be able to get this late mid-pack. I would never pick it any higher. I'm at a C- on it. You're only going to play this if you need the fixing, and otherwise you just should not. Up next is a cycle of 5 rare lands. We have Blooming Marsh, Botanical Sanctum, Concealed Courtyard, Inspiring Vantage, and Spire Bluff Canal. All of them are lands at rare, and they say name enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands. Note, it doesn't count itself, so if you play this as your 3rd land, it does enter untapped. Tap, add X or X to your mana pool. Black-green, or green-blue, or white or black, or red or white, or blue or red, depending on which land we're talking about here. These are fine. This is an artifact set anyway, so you're going to be really playing a bunch of colorless spells way more than you are splashing for a 3rd color. If I'm in both colors, I'll play these, and if I'm in one, I might consider it for a 3rd color splash, but either way, I'm not taking these very highly. Relatively mid-pack for me or later. I'm going to give them a C just because they're super reusable compared to Aether Hub, which gets the 1 use out of the energy unless you want to put in more. Just a C for these. Mid-pack, if you need it, take it. If you don't, pass it. Next up, we have Inventors Fair. Inventors Fair is a legendary land at rare. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. Tap, add colorless to your mana pool. Or pay 4 generic mana, tap, sacrifice Inventors Fair. Search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Activate this ability only if you control 3 or more artifacts. So we've already talked about this back in black. I'm not big on tutors in limited. So Diabolic Tutor, I could pay 4 mana, doesn't care what number of artifacts I control, and I can get any card I want. Inventors Fair, I have to have 3 artifacts, and I can only go get another artifact if I pay the same amount of mana, 4. Well, technically 5, because I have to sack the Inventors Fair. It does get the extra value of being a land, which means that I am going to generate some value and mana out of it before I do that, but I just don't see a point. I don't see why I would really play this card. If I had 2 Gear Hulks, I might play this. If I had just 1 Gear Hulk, I don't know that I would really go out of my way to play this. That being said, if you are in an artifact heavy deck, there's no penalty for you playing this. The colorless mana isn't really going to hurt you, so there's no downside to this exactly. But that being said, it's still just not a high pick in any way, shape, or form. I'm going to set this one at a pure C as well. This should be a late mid-pack pickup when basically you have nothing else really to think about picking. So C on Inventors Fair. It doesn't do enough for me in limited. All right, our final card of the entire set review. We got there. It was a large set. It was a struggle, but we got here. Sequestered Stash. Sequestered Stash is a land at uncommon. Tap, add colorless to your mana pool, or pay 4, tap, sacrifice Sequestered Stash. Put the top 5 cards of your library into your graveyard. Then you may put an artifact card from your graveyard on top of your library. F. This card's bad. This card's terrible. As I just said with Inventors Fair, as long as you're playing a lot of artifacts, it doesn't hurt your mana base, so you can play it. But the upside here is just garbage. Putting 5 cards into your graveyard, so you're just milling yourself, which isn't terrible. And then getting an artifact on top of your library? So slow, so garbage. Obviously, if your Gear Hulk has died, you can get back your Gear Hulk, but just way too much has to go right for this to be fine, let alone good or great, that I'm just totally out on this. I think this is terrible. There's no way I'm going to go out of my way to play this, and this should be probably one of the last picks in the pack. So pure F for Sequestered Stash. All right, so that's going to wrap it up for part 2 of Artifacts and the Lands, and that's going to wrap it up for the Kaladesh set review in its entirety. Thanks for sticking around with me for this. This has been a long one, but I have definitely shortened the videos down for sure, especially for a large set. I've loved having you guys interact with the comments down below. Almost every single one of you have been fantastic. Only a couple of jerks, and they've been told they've been jerks. I'm super excited to draft this set because it seems not necessarily complex, but hard to evaluate. I have seen people of all skill levels rating cards in all different ways. I have seen pro Hall of Fame players agreeing with me and disagreeing with me, and agreeing with the majority and disagreeing with the majority. This is going to be an interesting set to see how it shakes out. It'll remain to be seen if it's a good set or if it is an interesting set once it shakes out and we kind of figure out where everything fits in. But I'm really excited to start drafting this. I think energy and vehicles have really sort of opened up and shown that Wizards is willing to open up design to new ideas and really expand the game. And I'm excited to see where they go with that. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, if you disagree with any of my cards or want to tell me what your favorite cards are or tell me why you're excited for pre-release, let me know in the comments down below. You can find me on Twitter at TheManaLeak. That's L-E-E-K, like the vegetable, not the card. You can find me at Facebook.com/TheManaLeak, Twitch.tv/TheManaLeak, and if you do want to help support TheManaLeak, you can find me at Patreon.com/TheManaLeak. Thank you to the backers who are already in there, and if you want to join them, you can for as low as $1. Maybe you can go lower. I'm not actually sure. If you can do 50 cents, you can probably do 50 cents. If you want to do 1,000, you can do 1,000. I appreciate any and all backers over at Patreon. For anybody who happens to be new to the channel and doesn't necessarily know my schedule, just a quick recap. Beyond set reviews, you can expect Crack-A-Packs on Crack-A-Pack Tuesday. I will be doing a Kaladesh one this coming Tuesday. You can expect Wacky Wednesdays where I do non-standard drafting and Momir Vig and wacky stuff like that. Top 10 Thursday where I do a top 10 list. Spiky Saturday where I draft or play sealed of the current format. And then other random videos. So set review is over, but there will be Kaladesh content coming. This weekend you will see a pre-release recap where I go over both of my pre-releases, my decks, my matches, how I did. You will see box openings of Kaladesh, perhaps a few days early, depending on how things work out, as well as my own personal box opening. You will see from behind my shoulder my very first Kaladesh draft at the store on launch day, and just all kinds of content. So definitely stay tuned. I'm not just a set review channel if that's how you found me. Subscribe and you'll be able to see everything else. As always, if you do have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you this weekend for pre-release.